Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's day 8 of unprovoked and indiscriminate attack against a sovereign European country. As Russia takes its latest Ukrainian scalp, world leaders plead to Putin to establish a humanitarian passage for innocent civilians trapped in bloody war as food and medicines run out. This is GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Veteran political commentator and columnist Patrick O'Flynn joins me as we bring you the latest. TV and radio stations bombed in Kiev alongside the capital's principal railway station. What next, as the world struggles to contain Putin? The UK's shale gas wells abandoned and sealed up, as reports in France expose the Kremlin's alleged infiltration of environmental groups to keep Europe dependent on Russian gas, while the UK is set to spend £2 billion on imports this year alone. And Russian jets over non-NATO Sweden. Is Putin trying to drag the rest of Europe into his brutal war? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you want to discuss? Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or follow our updates on Twitter @GBNews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. An Estonian-owned cargo ship has sunk off the Ukrainian coast near Odessa following an explosion. The ship's manager says it may have hit a mine. He says 4 crew members are missing. That as a Bangladeshi cargo ship was struck by a missile at the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Olvia. This video purportedly shows the vessel on fire, posted by the Ukrainian government. 1 crew member has been killed, and the Bangladeshi government says rescue efforts are underway to save others. 9 people have been killed and 4 wounded after a Russian airstrike hit 2 schools and houses in Chernihiv, according to the city's governor. The city's been under heavy fire today. This explosion, caught on a dash cam, can be seen there. An oil refinery was also targeted. The UK's Ministry of Defence says that despite continued shelling, the cities of Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Mariupol remain in Ukrainian hands. Speaking in Lithuania earlier, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said Russian aggression must be contained.
Putin must lose in Ukraine. We're helping Ukraine defend itself. Our defensive weapons from the United Kingdom are now being used to stop Russian tanks. And it's vital at this juncture that we keep our foot on the gas. We've worked with the US, the EU and G7 to cut off funding for Putin's war machine, kicking Russian banks out of the financial system. We've also shut our airspace to Russian planes, and we're fast-forwarding sanctions against Russian oligarchs. But we need to go further.
Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. Ceasefire negotiations between Kiev and Moscow are taking place today. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says his country's ready to talk, but he's warned Ukraine's military infrastructure will continue to be targeted.
We are ready to talk, but we will continue our operation. We can't allow ourselves to preserve infrastructure threatening the safety of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Demilitarization in this sense, I mean the destruction of the infrastructure that threatens us, will be completed. Even if we sign the peace treaty, it must include such an article.
The International Criminal Court is launching an investigation into alleged war crimes. In the largest referral in the history of the ICC, the UK and 37 allies have called for a probe into Russia's atrocities. It follows reports that cluster and vacuum bombs have been dropped in residential areas. Moscow denies it's targeting civilians. Here, the Health Secretary has told NHS leaders to stop using energy supplied by Russian-owned company Gazprom. More than a dozen NHS trusts in England are thought to be using the firm, along with several local councils. Last year, the contracts were reportedly worth £16 million. Sajid Javid has also requested a wider review of any Russian role in supply chains across the health service. The sporting world is also taking action, with Formula One announcing it's terminated its Russian Grand Prix contract. Meanwhile, athletes from Russia and Belarus will not be allowed to compete at the 2022 Winter Paralympics in Beijing. The International Paralympic Committee has reversed its original decision to allow them to take part from Saturday under a neutral flag. That announcement was met by criticism and the threat of a boycott. The IPC says the situation in the athlete villages has become untenable. In other news, Sarah Everard's family has been paying tribute to her a year after she was murdered by a police officer. In a statement, they say they miss Sarah all the time and have been overwhelmed by the support from the public. Ms. Everard was killed by serving Met police officer Wayne Cousins as she walked home in South London. The Ministry of Justice plans to close almost half of its Nightingale courts in the UK within weeks. The temporary courts were set up to cope with the backlog of cases during the COVID-19 pandemic. 11 are due to be shut down at the end of the month. The remaining 12 will stay open until March next year. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alex and we need to talk about.
Russia has taken its first major scalp. The southern regional capital of Kherson, now under Moscow's control. In just over a week of fighting, Putin's army has suffered heavy casualties, while Ukrainian forces, bolstered by brave citizens taking up arms and joining the resistance, have held out beyond even the most optimistic predictions. But will the cornered Russian rat retreat or lash out? Other major cities have come under heavy bombardment overnight, with 4 big strikes landing on the capital, Kiev, taking out TV networks and targeting the main station as people continue to flee for their lives as vital supplies of food and medicine start to run out. International efforts focus on negotiating a humanitarian corridor for Ukrainians, chillingly warned by Russia to get out. Whether Putin will accept or not will expose quite how inhumane he is prepared to be in pursuit of his still, as yet, unclear ambitions. It's day 8 of Putin's shock invasion. Well, we can cross live to Lviv in Ukraine and speak to journalist for the Kiev Independent, Osama Terajima. Asami, thank you so much for being on the programme again. What is the latest that you're hearing from the ground in Kiev, in Lviv? I mean, do you feel like things are really ramping up?
Obviously, we see that this 40-mile long Russian column is approaching the capital. We see that it's only like approximately 20 miles away. So we see it's very close, and we don't know what Russia is planning next. Only one man knows, and that's Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. So we are all worried for what's going to happen. But and we also hear more bombs and more explosions. And I just yesterday we heard this. There was this report of the explosion that rocked the central station in Kiev, and there's thousands of people, including women and children, trying to flee to a different part of Ukraine or to abroad. So it could have literally hit anyone, and we see that Russian shellings have also been occurring not only in Kiev but in other major cities as well, and missiles as well. So we see that they're not just targeting the soldiers, but they're targeting also civilians, and this is a danger for everyone in Ukraine. But we are trying to stay calm, and while it is scary what the future holds, we're trying to stay united and strong together.
Yeah, I mean, the civilian response has, I think, taken the whole world by surprise at how brave Ukrainians are being. But you mentioned there the main station in Kiev being bombed while Ukrainian civilians were told by Russian forces to get out, to expect a heavy bombardment. How are those evacuations going? And what about the encroaching shortages of things such as food and fuel and vital medicines?
So Ukraine's Interior Ministry says that the blast in the station was caused by a wreckage of a Russian missile that was downed by Ukrainian air defense. But this has not been confirmed 100%. Like, we don't know yet which one's the real version. But in terms of evacuating civilians, yes, there are many people who have stayed in Kiev, but also there are lots of people who've left, because we see that in the next couple of days, or maybe during the week, it's going to be a very heavy fighting. We see that Russian forces really want the capital. So and so many people there's lots of people at the station trying to get on a train, and it's really chaotic because people are trying to. There's so little space. And the tickets are already free right now because it's time of war, and it's a very serious situation. So everyone is just trying to get on the train, and the station was chaotic. But if you go to the central part of Kiev, it's not as chaotic. Everyone is more calm, and there is still food and there's still water. But the supplies of, for example, like long-lasting foods such as pasta, bread, and long-term breads and like rice, those supplies are running low.
Asami, please do stay safe, and let's catch up again soon. It's always fantastic to have you on the show. That's Asami Terajima, who's a journalist for Kiev Independent. Well, let's talk to former British Army Commander Colonel Richard Kemp. Colonel Kemp, you had Asami Terajima there saying that it seems to be Ukrainians are expected for a particularly heavy bombardment over coming days. But things haven't really been going to plan for Russia, have they? And we've seen this 40-mile death convoy, as it's been named, failing yet to get into Kiev. What do you think the Russian strategy is?
Well, the original Russian strategy was to bring down the government of Kiev with minimum force, without too much bloodshed, and that was not for humanitarian reasons, but it was to prevent there being mass body bags going back to Russia, and also to destroy too much of Ukraine. But that doesn't appear to have succeeded, and therefore Russia is on the verge and has already begun much more extreme violence. And they're probably the strategy is probably to take the other cities, such as Mariupol, such as Kherson, which, as we saw, has fallen already, and Kharkov, before turning on Kiev with full force. And it may be that the reason for that sequencing is perhaps the availability of air assets to support the attacks. And so that 40-mile long column may well just be waiting there and waiting until the moment's right to be committed to an attack or encirclement of Kiev. It may also be there's logistic problems with the vehicles as well, but I think it's much more likely that it's just waiting for the order to move.
There's been a lot of disinformation circulating about the number of casualties that have been inflicted on both sides. But there are reports that the Russian casualties could number far more than, in fact, during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which was a 10-year-long conflict. How much more do you think that Russia has in their arsenal to commit to this campaign?
Well, I think we should regard reports of casualties on both sides with some caution, because, of course, in a battle, reports and figures, etc., are often deeply confused and turn out later to be wrong. And of course, there's also an element of propaganda from both sides, quite understandably, in a conflict. So I don't know. We don't know, obviously, whether there has been the huge number of casualties that Ukraine is claiming against the Russians. I do think the Russians have got a great deal more in reserve, though. They've got overwhelming force that's far greater than the Ukrainian army. And also has greater capability than the Ukrainian army. But we have seen the Ukrainians put up a very staunch fight. We can only admire their fight against the Russian invaders. But I do think that the Russians have got a lot more to come after the initial echelons have been doing their attacking.
Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you for your insight into what may be the Russian strategy then. It seems to me possibly one of tactical delay. Colonel Richard Kemp, former British Army commander. Well, let's go to my studio guest, the political commentator, Patrick O'Flynn. I mean, day 8 doesn't seem to be any turning point here. It doesn't seem that Ukraine's going to be able to fight back enough anytime soon. Do you get the impression, as tensions continue to mount, that while we continue sending weapons to Ukraine, there's almost now a sort of tragic realization that what can we do?
Yeah, it looks very much like Putin can eventually take the main population centres in Ukraine, including the capital city. It also looks like it could be at the cost of very high casualty numbers. But if you think Putin's grand deluded plan was to have this fervour throughout Ukraine, Belarus and Russia for the idea of Greater Russia, he's already lost that, hasn't he? And the poison he's set down in the minds of Ukrainian people, including Russian-speaking Ukrainians, kind of guarantees, I would think, long-term, that he's not going to be able to hold the whole country by force, and it will be an attritional war. I think I agree with what Colonel Kemp was saying. We've got to be braced for some horrific, heavy bombardment of those cities, and that we've already seen the attempt to scare the civilian population out of them. And this phase could go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. But long term, the strategy of Putin has already kind of bitten the dust. Is he going to be able to hold the country? At what cost? We know in the age of mass communications now that stories get from the front line back to granny or mother in Moscow or elsewhere in Russia. And so his ability to kind of screen the Russian public from the truth of what's going on is much lower than it would have been for previous leaders back in the time, for instance, of the Afghanistan invasion. So it's going to turn into a kind of a long struggle, which the West will have to fight, not directly militarily against Russia, but arming anyone willing to take them on within Ukraine, and then financial war, a war of morale, an energy dependency war, which obviously Russia's been well ahead of the game on. And the idea will surely be to put pressure, gradually crank it up to the point that Russia or key people within Russia can bring the regime down.
Yeah, I think that's our only option, isn't it, really, Patrick? I want to know what you think about everything we're talking about. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or follow our updates at gbnews on Twitter. You are, of course, with GB News on TV and radio after the break. It's a year since Sarah Everard was abducted and murdered. But is society any safer for women? First, it's time for the weather.
Hello again. Something of a dull, damp sandwich today. A slice of the country, dull and soggy, but some brighter skies across the east and some sunny spells developing in the far west as well. The reason, we have a weather front kind of stagnating across the UK. There's not a lot of isobars on the charts, so not a lot of wind to shift it. So stuck under this weather front, you're going to see a lot of cloud and outbreaks of rain. Southern and central Scotland, northwest England, much of Wales, down across the Midlands as well. But for further far southwest of England, Pembrokeshire, Northern Ireland, west coast of Scotland, mostly dry and bright, and from Yorkshire down to southeast England, also staying largely fine. And here, the top temperature's 10 in Hull, 13 in London, but stuck under that rain band 7 or 8 in Newcastle and Manchester at the very best. And that rain bands will only slowly work further eastwards through the night, so staying pretty soggy, the rain pepping up across eastern Scotland, pushing more widely across northeast England, perhaps turning a lot drier across Wales overnight, but we'll keep a lot of cloud. That'll help to keep the temperatures up, but with some clearer skies. South Wales, Northern Ireland, temperatures may dip close to freezing. Under that zone of cloud and rain, though, temperatures will hold up, but it will feel cold again here through Friday. East coast of Scotland, northeast England, parts of East Anglia, maybe still into parts of the Midlands. Dull, damp, dank again. A bit more rain across the southeast of England on Friday compared to today as well. But further west again, generally dry, a brighter day across the Midlands, although still predominantly cloudy and still quite chilly with temperatures suppressed in single figures where we've got that rain, which is likely to linger in parts of the east even into the weekend. So we'll continue to see some outbreaks of rain across southeast Scotland, eastern parts of England on Saturday. Elsewhere, many places will be dry and bright with some sunny spells in the west and staying largely dry into Monday as well, and also turning colder.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1 year since the chilling abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard shocked the nation, leading the country to ask, how could this have happened? And many women to question how safe they are on British streets. Revelations of rape, misogyny and assault in the Metropolitan Police accompany shocking statistics showing that sexual offences in London rose by 25% last year alone. Meanwhile, rape culture in schools has seen one website receive over 50,000 testimonies from girls who say they have been attacked or abused. Have things always been so bad? Or is the 21st century a dreadful era for women? Well, let's talk to Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner Katie Bourne, who was herself a victim of stalking. Katie, 25% up on last year. The figures of women in London saying that they have experienced some form of sexual assault. Does that surprise you?
Probably not, no. Most women that I've spoken to, and if you talk to the women in your lives, will have had some form of sexual assault in their lives, whether it's from something like catcalling all the way through, unfortunately, to serious sexual offences. It's something that the majority of women have learnt to live with, I guess.
I mean, as we look at the anniversary of the shocking murder of Sarah Everard, and a lot of women campaigning in that vigil, and there's been a lot of attention put upon how safe women are in this day and age. Do you feel like enough's being done, or is it the case that where governments used to say tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, it's the latter part that they are distinctly failing in right now?
Well, it's really tragic, isn't it? What happened with Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa and others as well. The only thing that I can sort of take comfort from in this last 12 months is the fact that there has been this national outpouring and people far more willing to talk about some of their experiences, and actually more people standing up saying, you know, enough is enough. And the number of men who've come forwards, because let's not demonize men in this. The majority of our, husbands, brothers, fathers, sons, they actually want to do the right thing. And they've come forward and said, well, what do we do? What do we need to do to make women feel safer on the streets and feel safer in their everyday lives? So I suppose in a way it's good that people are talking about it. Now we need to see that action and how that's translating, whether it's more training for police, lots of organisations now working to tackle violence against women and girls. Certainly in my own county, a lot of positive steps being made in that front.
I mean, a recent survey showed that only about a third of women say they now trust the police. And given those shocking revelations of WhatsApp groups and behaviour at, say, Charing Cross Police Station in the Met Police, where there were misogynistic messages being exchanged, do you worry that sort of coarse behaviour is actually infiltrating officers on the front line?
Well, of course it's concerning. And I know my own police force will be the first to say that, they will do everything they can to root out this kind of behaviour. Our Chief Constable is very clear. She will not tolerate it. And she's very quick when anything like that is found. One thing we have seen more of is actually officers themselves coming forwards and reporting behaviour they think is inappropriate with any colleagues. And that's definitely to be commended as well. But we want women to feel safe, whether it's in their own homes, whether it's on the streets, anywhere in their lives. After all, let's face it, we're 51% of the population, and we have a right to our own lives and to feel that safety. I do know, though, to give that reassurance that police forces are working really hard to build that confidence back. The majority of those police officers and police staff are absolutely mortified by what's happened. And I do know that the huge amount has gone down. We've done loads of consultations and survey groups, working with a lot of women's groups locally to say, what is it that you want to see that is the change? And there were some clear indicators that came out of that for me as a police and crime commissioner. And there's clear work that I've been able to take forwards as a result with our police force.
Katie Bourne, thank you so much for coming on my programme again. Always a pleasure to speak to you. I mean, Patrick, this is sort of conversation we've had sidebar, isn't it? And I've always maintained that, my 38 years on this planet, I think things are markedly worse in the last 10 years. And I see it as a lot stemming from the pornification of society. We know that Wayne Couzens was a prolific user of hardcore porn. I mean, do you think that going back to that phrase, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, all the government seems to be doing are mopping up the ill effects of a culture which is now endemic in British society, which really fails to respect women at all?
I think there's certainly an issue, isn't there, about porn and the accessibility of it to young teenagers, even children younger than that, and what they've come to see as, quotes, a normal boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, and a coarsening and a vulgarising of that. And I think that has had a damaging effect on quite a few of our young adults. I think, there's another issue. Certainly you singled out a long litany of appalling conduct by certain police officers, right from, the murderer Wayne Couzens to sharing of inappropriate, shocking crime scene images, the messages that were flying around Charing Cross Police Station. I do happen to think that that police culture will markedly change. I think there's a real determination both from the government side and police leadership side, to make that overdue change. But that doesn't get away from the fact, by far the biggest threat to women is not police officers. It's a hardcore minority of fairly horrible men in public spaces at certain vulnerable times who are ready and eager to prey on women in vulnerable positions. And you talk about tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. I would actually pick the other thing, not the causes of crime. I would pick tough on crime. I think the sentences for those sort of blokes, and quite often, this is anecdotal, but you will find a man who's convicted of a sex assault on women has previous, perhaps unconnected criminal convictions, just the bad lot tendency. I think there's a case for where you convict someone who's maybe conducted a violent assault on a man in a public space, or pickpocketing, or a thief. There's a case now for curfews if they're likely to be a menace in public spaces. I think we've got to get really, really tough on that side of it, as well as the attitudes, as well as the tackling online porn and impressionable young minds.
Patrick, thank you. Here is GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, as Putin's gaze falls on Sweden, with Russian fighter jets violating Swedish airspace, we're looking at how the world is reacting to the crisis. Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. An Estonian-owned cargo ship has sunk off the Ukrainian coast near Odessa following an explosion. The ship's manager says it may have hit a mine. 4 crew members are missing. That as a Bangladeshi cargo ship was struck by a missile at the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Olvia. This video purportedly shows the vessel on fire, posted by the Ukrainian government. 1 crew member's been killed, and the Bangladeshi government says rescue efforts are underway to save others. The city of Chernihiv has been under heavy fire today. This explosion caught on a dash cam. 9 people were killed and 4 wounded after a Russian airstrike hit 2 schools and houses. That's according to the city's governor. An oil refinery was also targeted. The International Criminal Court is launching an investigation into alleged war crimes and the largest referral in the history of the ICC. The UK and 37 allies have called for a probe into Russia's atrocities. It follows reports that cluster and vacuum bombs have been dropped in residential areas. Moscow denies it's targeting civilians. The sporting world's also taking action, with Formula One announcing it's terminated its Russian Grand Prix contract. Meanwhile, athletes from Russia and Belarus will not be allowed to compete at the 2022 Winter Paralympics in Beijing. The International Paralympic Committee has reversed its original decision to allow them to take part from Saturday under a neutral flag. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. More at the top of the hour. It's back to Alex, and we need to talk about in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Those begging the West to do more to help Ukraine as it is savaged by Putin's forces are reminded of the complexity of global relationships. Relationships whose collapse could catalyse a third world war. The EU has declared a no-fly zone to block Russian jets and bombers attacking Ukraine, while NATO reinforces its eastern flanks, with Article 5 of the Treaty on Collective Defence, meaning any assault on a member state would invoke retaliation from all 30. So, as 2 Russian jets encroach on Swedish airspace, as the country conducts joint military exercises with fellow non-NATO member Finland, and both ask to join the defensive alliance, is Putin deliberately goading the rest of Europe to react in order to drag the entire continent into war? Meanwhile, the emergency meeting of the UN yesterday to condemn Russia's invasion saw 141 of 193 countries call for immediate withdrawal. But what about the others? The 5 nations that voted against include Russia, Syria, and North Korea, and that should hardly surprise the world. But the 35 who abstained also raise grave questions as to quite how far Russian influence stretches. Well, to discuss it all, let's talk to Dr. Alan Mendoza, who's Executive Director of the Foreign Affairs think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. Alan, fantastic to have you back on the programme. Let's begin with these Russian jets in Swedish airspace, as Sweden and Finland both do joint military exercises and appeal to become members of NATO. Do you think that this could have been deliberate by Putin to once again ratchet up tensions and potentially invite the rest of Europe to do something which could be a precursor of his own next move?
It may not be an invitation to do something, because, of course, defending your own territory is less about doing something and more about, the actions you might take as normal. But the reality is, of course, this is a move directed by Moscow and designed to rattle the saber yet again, to show, look, don't think that I'm satisfied simply with Ukraine. I'm going to continue being a thorn in your side as well. And that includes, of course, trying to buzz your airspace whenever possible.
I mean, the EU closed its airspace to Russian aeroplanes. But what do you think of this particular move now by countries like Finland and Sweden to join NATO? Is that the way forward? Could this be the route out of this crisis, by showing Vladimir Putin that the rest of Europe is indeed keen on solidarity and hell-bent on preventing any more aggressions from Russia?
Well, I fear it won't be the way out of the crisis full stop, because that's not going to persuade Putin to abandon his crazed imperialistic ambitions in Ukraine. But it might be an unintended consequence of the conflict. The idea that countries in Europe that had previously shied away from formal alliances in defensive military means might now decide that their sort of national interests are finally better served by coming together with their fellow sort of European countries and others in an alliance like NATO, because the alternative is to hang like Ukraine has done and twist in the wind should Russia turn its attentions to you.
Let's move on now to the UN vote yesterday condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine and calling for immediate withdrawal. And let's look particularly at some of the countries that abstained, because it seems to me that the sort of axis of changing geopolitical powers is really quite illustrated by this, where Pakistan has announced they're going to import a lot of oil and wheat from Russia. China, of course, abstained, seemingly on the side very much of Vladimir Putin, although not wanting to reveal it publicly. But perhaps one of the surprise abstentions was India. What is going on there, and how worried should we be when very close allies of the UK, countries that we give a lot of foreign aid to, are not prepared to stand up against the Kremlin?
Well, it's annoying that India has abstained, but it's not necessarily surprising. You see, the Indians have had a very long-standing relationship stretching back into Cold War days with Moscow. It's a defensive relationship. They buy approximately 50% of their military kit, in fact, from Russia, including some pretty controversial kit like the S-400 missile defense system, which they were told by the Americans, don't do it. You know, we're potentially sanctioning people who buy this. And they said, we're going to buy it anyway. In the past, Russia has actually also helped India at the UN Security Council when it comes to Kashmir measures. So there's a long-standing reason why India might well want to take its own personal interest here and not sever its relationship with Moscow. It doesn't mean it's right. In fact, it's terrible given what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. But you can sort of, begin to see why India has done that. Broader question you ask about foreign aid and how this plays into it. Sure, I think this is one of the reasons why, we wanted the Department for International Development to be subsumed quite correctly back into the Foreign Office, because there needs to be a better link, doesn't there, with what Britain's strategic and national interests are and the money we disperse around the globe. It makes no sense, as you suggest, to splash money out in places and then countries defy basic norms of international behaviour and are prepared to sort of turn a blind eye to an aggressor like this.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, thank you as ever for coming on the programme. I mean, Patrick, do you think our foreign policy should extend in that direction, where your enemy's enemy, or your enemy's friend is also your enemy, let's say? And should we be looking to apply pressure on countries like India to force them into saying to the Kremlin, enough is enough, and cutting their own supply chain from Moscow?
Yes, we should, and I would think that certainly is going on. We have a fairly mushrooming trade and wider relationship with India. I'm sure messages are going through about how disappointing we find their attitude, although, as Alan was saying, there's a wider context to that. I think Pakistan is, I think perhaps even our number one aid recipient. They've gone further than India by Imran Khan, greasing up to Putin in Moscow the other day, signing big deals with him. I fail to see now what exactly we get from our enormous aid spend in Pakistan and what good it is doing in that country, because that country doesn't seem to be making much progress to me. On the other issue, the buzzing of the Swedish airspace, I think that is Putin focusing the minds of current NATO members about what it means to accept new countries into NATO. He is saying, look, think about this. I've done this in Sweden, which is currently not a NATO member. Were it to be a NATO member, and I just did that, you've signed Article 5, and you might be slipping into an escalating conflict here. So I think that's him trying to intimidate NATO. Personally, I hope that NATO does take in Sweden and Finland, and I think it should be done very quickly, and that will be a net loss to Putin. And I think if it's done very quickly and now, it's very hard to characterize that as a massive escalation of hostility from the West. But I think it's a negative outcome for Moscow that will be proportionate to the current situation.
Patrick, thank you. Now, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has today said she's spoken to the UN and others about creating a humanitarian corridor for the safe passage of aid and humanitarian support to people fleeing Ukraine. One man who has taken things into his own hands is Oleg Antioniuk, who hails from Ukraine but moved to the UK in 1997. He's travelled to Poland and joins me now from the Ukrainian border. Oleg, it's wonderful to have you back on the show. How are things on the ground there? I mean, I'd imagine that there's been a huge acceleration in the number of people needing the help of people like you.
We went to the Polish-Ukrainian border in one of the places where the people crossing the border, yeah? And there is a lot of people already in Poland and Hungary, Romania, Slovenia, as of yesterday, it wasn't that big of a queue. People, it wasn't like it was 2 or 3 days ago, but because the main reason is it's very well organized. The people coming in, the people already know who's going to pick them up, or if they don't know, they go to a special shelter where they live in the passport numbers, the address and the names, and so they can be traced easily after everything finished. So as you can see, we dropped first a lot of the humanitarian things like baby food, clothes, military boots, a bit for military, and medicine. So we doing our part, and I want to say a lot of thanks to Polish people and the English government, to not to be silent, so they talk about it.
And what are conditions like there? I mean, it looks pretty cold. Do people have warm and safe places to stay? What sort of things are they desperately in need of?
You know what? I mean, they need the warm clothes because basically at night it goes to -5. Daytime is probably +3, 4. And the people burning wood by the border, like a Polish fire brigades, trucks keep going over the border, bringing people in. And they give food for free, even they travel for free around the Poland, because we dropped one family. They needed to go to the direction where we were going, because we wanted to find about 7 people, but nobody was going to the direction where we were going back. And we found one family, we brought them to Lublin. We bought them tickets, we bought them a hotel, we booked them hotel, and this morning we got the news they're already in Brno, in Slovakia. So, as I said, it's a woman and her 14-year-old daughter. They're from Zhytomyr, which is about 500 kilometers from the Polish border, and it was bombarded, a military unit was bombarded day before yesterday there. So they advanced into western Ukraine slowly, but they'll be stopped.
Oleg, thank you so much for giving us an update, and please keep up the good work. You're doing a marvellous job, and we need a lot of people like you, all hands to the mill on this one as that humanitarian crisis continues to get worse.
Thank you for having me on.
Always a pleasure, Oleg, and let's catch up again soon. You've been sending in your views today about the Ukrainian invasion. Andy says, sadly, there is only one way to deal with a bully, which will result in loss of life. The best people to end this is for the Russian people to overthrow Putin. Again, many lives will be impacted. Tim says people in Ukraine need food as well as weapons. If Russia is cutting cities off, they will need other supplies too. Johnny says Russia will only offer to stop the invasion of Ukraine if Ukraine gives up part of its territory. That's like stealing £100 from someone, then agreeing to give it back if they let you keep £30. Well, an astonishing story has rippled in French headlines today amidst revelations that the Kremlin infiltrated NGOs campaigning against nuclear power there. This is nothing new. The Centre for European Studies revealed that the Russian government invested $95 million in activists fighting shale gas in the UK. Back in 2014, then NATO chief Anders Rasmussen warned that Vladimir Putin's government was building a disinformation campaign against fracking to ensure continued reliance on Russian gas, and made clear that fracking should be used to shore up Europe's energy security. The plea fell on deaf ears then, and continues to do so, as the UK's only shale gas wells are sealed and abandoned, while Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng says fracking is not the answer. Well, appalling headlines today that the UK is set to spend more than £2 billion importing Russian gas this year should surely prompt a rethink. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, is here to explain to us more. Liam, Do you understand this? I mean, 10 years ago, when people were saying we should frack, Putin will have a lot of leverage if we continue this dependence on Russian gas. And in fact, we could be self-sufficient in energy, if not even an energy exporter. You would think today that those lessons have been learned, but apparently not.
Well, in a conflict like this, Alex, grown-up people, while obviously focusing on the military escalation, the humanitarian fallout, you got to keep your eyes on the money. As I do on my show every lunchtime from 1 till 2. And clearly Putin has been preparing for this invasion. He's been building both oil and gas pipelines to China, now the world's biggest energy importer in recent years, in order to maintain his leverage over the West in case they feel like sanctioning Russian oil and gas and starving him of funds. But also, of course, the Russians won't want the fracking industry to develop in the UK because we are a major energy importer as well. The whole of Western Europe, as you know, imports about 40% of its gas from Russia. And since 2018, here in the UK, the government has imposed a moratorium on fracking in Britain, a moratorium on extracting what's called tight formation shale gas, which that moratorium's been there for 4 years. It was very much introduced under the auspices of environmental campaigners, the Green lobby. Of course, the Conservatives have been keen to be seen as close to the environmental lobby, lots of young people as they try and build their voter base. But guess what? Fracking provides, if it was going to happen in the UK, we've had exploration wells in many parts of the country, not least in the northwest. It provides not only lots of jobs in areas where jobs are needed, often those red wall seats that we often talk about, it also would allow us to develop a lot more of our domestic energy supply alongside North Sea oil and gas, which has also been limited with the government, again, under the kind of COP26 auspices, the green environmental agenda, not extending as many licenses as it has in the past. But I tell you what, Alex, I talk to a lot of people in government a lot of the time. There is now a big pressure on the business secretary. There's big pressure on Downing Street, not only to end that moratorium on fracking, but also to allow more exploration, the development of oil and gas in the North Sea in order to bolster Britain's energy security. Just today, Richard Dearlove, who's the former head of MI6, has come out and said that we need to get fracking. And I think many more people, as energy bills spiral, as the cost of living here in the UK goes up, a lot more people are going to be saying, maybe we do need to move to renewable energy, maybe we do need to pursue this net zero agenda, but more slowly, more gradually, with more use for now of oil and gas.
Yeah, I'm going to bring Patrick O'Flynn back into this conversation. I mean, we know when it comes to trying to move the grid to totally renewables that we still need gas to plug the gaps. Why on earth is this government sticking their fingers in the air when you've got people like Richard Dearlove saying this is the answer, when the Secretary General of NATO 8 years ago warned that we would need this, and when there's a possibility out there that we could not only be self-sufficient, but export that energy to countries which right now are scrambling to find solutions to let go of Kremlin-funded gas, and in doing so are creating an energy crisis.
Yeah, well, I think Liam and you've summed it up very well. I think we have a luxury mindset about energy that we can't afford. And what I personally would like to see is Kate Bingham being taken off her vaccines task force, where she scythed through the normal procedures and regulations of Whitehall and got a job done, and be put in charge of an energy security task force, because I do think it's just as an acute situation. It might not be fracking is the biggest answer. It could make a contribution. Certainly the moratorium should be swept away. I absolutely agree about looking to expand oil and gas in the North Sea. I think, you know, smaller new generation nuclear plants, rather than this sort of 10 to 20 year process it takes us just to build one new major nuclear power station. You know, I think we've given far too much sway to the radical environmentalists, to the point that we've allowed them to shut down the coal industry. We've allowed them to shut down fracking. We've allowed them to kind of come down quite heavy against oil and gas and against nuclear, Well, you know, if carbon emissions are their number one priority, fair enough, as Liam was saying, let's head to net zero at a responsible pace. But you can't wipe out then any grounds for new nuclear capacity too. We're not in a luxury situation here. And as you've heard and explained, we have an adversary in Putin, a serious long-term geopolitical adversary who is using energy capacity as a weapon of domination. We've got to wise up.
Yeah, Liam, what is going on here when we were told 8 years ago that the Kremlin was, in fact, helping to fund and organise radical eco-activists to prevent fracking? Similar headlines circulating today again in France. But nobody else seems to talk about this. And today, of all days, we learn that the UK is going to spend $2 billion this year on liquefied natural gas from Russia. And yet the announcements coming out of the government is Sajid Javid saying to some NHS trusts, stop buying stuff from Gazprom.
It's a very complex situation. You know, big countries fund NGOs. In other countries, it happens. This is sort of modern day espionage with a different name. We were just seeing there, GB News viewers on television as opposed to our radio listeners, we were just seeing there some pictures of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline being laid between Russia and Germany. We're now seeing some pictures of solar panels. But this Nord Stream 2 pipeline, it already exists. You know, we've been hearing that Russia's stopping it being used, but there's already Nord Stream 1. It's been pumping gas from Russia to Germany since 2012. Nord Stream 2 has just been finished, and the Germans are saying they're not going to open that for now. But Nord Stream 1 is still operational. These are the longest undersea pipelines in the world. For the Russians, Nord Stream 1 was strategic because it meant that they didn't have to then pipe gas across Ukraine, which meant Ukraine became strategically less important. That's what Ukraine and many other powers were concerned about. But be in no doubt, Putin's been building pipelines, gas and oil pipelines, to China as well. So this invasion has been a long time coming. He's been preparing for it. He's been building up his financial reserves. I don't think he will have banked on central banks across the Western world sanctioning the Russian central bank. An astonishing move, which means the Russians can't get hold of the dollars, the pounds and the euros that they own in order to shore up their own currency, in order to shore up the savings, the ruble-denominated savings of their own population. So this is a very, very complex situation, Alex. And as I've said to you, when we're not on national television together, it is difficult for someone in my position to talk often about the economics and the money involved in this conflict when the pictures of the humanitarian crisis are on our screens and are so moving and so disturbing. But we have to keep our eye on the money and financial implications of what we're doing here, because the more these sanctions cost the West in terms of our energy supplies, in terms of our cost of living, in terms of inflation for people living here, the more pressure will be on our democratically elected politicians, after all, to keep those tough sanctions up on Vladimir Putin's Russia. This money and finance part of war, this is not a tasteless side subject. It's a major part of the conflict that we're seeing here. And when it comes to this East-West conflict, there is an economic war now alongside this conflict, military conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Indeed. Now, not long left on programme, so in a word, both of you, Liam, is it time to frack?
Absolutely. I think it's almost inevitable now that moratorium will be lifted.
And Patrick?
Yes, but I don't see it as the panacea. I think expanding North Sea oil and gas might be a quicker, bigger thing, but absolutely no moratorium.
If there's one thing we've all learned, it's time to get real when it comes to Putin. He's had his ducks in a row for a long time, hasn't he? Well, that's about it for me. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News, same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be doing a special Inside Putin's Brain, from Vlad to Mad. We've got some brilliant guests coming up where we try and figure out what is going on inside the Russian president's head. Coming up next, of course, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first, let's have a look at the weather. Bye-bye.
Hello again. Something of a dull, damp sandwich today. A slice of the country dull and soggy, but some brighter skies across the east and some sunny spells developing in the far west as well. The reason we have a weather front kind of stagnating across the UK. There's not a lot of isobars on the chart, so not a lot of wind to shift it. So stuck under this weather front, you're going to see a lot of cloud and outbreaks of rain. Southern and central Scotland, northwest England, much of Wales, down across the Midlands as well. But for the far southwest of England, Pembrokeshire, Northern Ireland, west coast of Scotland, mostly dry and bright, and from Yorkshire down to southeast England, also staying largely fine. And here, the top temperature's 10 in Hull, 13 in London, but stuck under that rain band, 7 or 8 in Newcastle and Manchester at the very best. And that rain bands will only slowly work further eastwards through the night, so staying pretty soggy. The rain pepping up across eastern Scotland, pushing more widely across northeast England, perhaps turning a lot drier across Wales overnight, but we'll keep a lot of cloud. That'll help to keep the temperatures up, but with some clearer skies. South Wales, Northern Ireland, temperatures may dip close to freezing. Under that zone of cloud and rain, though, temperatures will hold up, but it will feel cold again here through Friday. East coast of Scotland, northeast England, parts of East Anglia, maybe still into parts of the Midlands. Dull, damp.